So I'd like to talk to you this morning about publications, so magazines, newsletters, that sort of thing, and things to consider, really, what's involved. So first, really, is why do you want a magazine newsletter in the first place? Well, there are a couple of key areas, really. You could have an externally focused magazine, a company magazine. It's there to increase your brand awareness. It'll help with that. It demonstrates your expertise by the articles you put in. Keep customers informed of your latest news, the industry news, events, that sort of thing. Educate the prospects and your and also your existing clients. You can be seen as an industry leader. Obviously, long-term, it help with your sales pipeline, hopefully. And you can showcase company successes such as projects that you've done well in or that you've won, and this helps promote your services and raises your expertise. Obviously, it is about long-term revenue, but you've got to look at what is in it for the reader as well. You know, that's otherwise nobody other than you is going to read it. The other focus is a sort of staff newsletter, an internally focused publication. That's more about keeping staff up to date with the latest news internally. So that could be stuff from HR, but it could be other projects and things you've worked on. It helps to raise morale if people are spread apart in different multi-site locations. Can increase motivation and morale through, sort of employee of the month information, rewards programs, social responsibility, events, weddings, birthdays, that sort of thing. You can have company FAQs and important information that you can disseminate that way. And you can showcase projects that have been a success for the company, but recognize the staff that helped make that success happen. So then you've got to look at how are you going to produce it. Essentially, in most magazine production, publishing, it does involve one or more of designers, art workers, editors, writers, photographers, people involved in print distribution, fulfillment, production, advertising, social media, marketing, and these are all roles that are generally needed in some way for every publication, whether it's small or large. And so if you don't have somebody else's name to tick against one of these roles, that probably means that you're doing it as part of what you're doing. So how are you going to plan your publication? So how long is it going to take you or your team to create the initial concept, design each edition, that involve writing all the copy or sourcing the stories or briefing the writers to write it for you, taking the images or finding the images or briefing the photographers to source the images, to produce the images for you, editing and proofing, all the rounds that's involved in that, and finalizing. And think several months ahead. In most magazine production, when an issue is going ahead into print, the next one's already in design. The stories for the one after that are being edited, and future issues beyond that are already being planned. Some of this stuff could be a year or more ahead. So if you're working alone and it'll take you 6 weeks from start to finish for each issue, don't make it a monthly magazine, as the editions will crash into one another and you'll go mad trying to keep up. And think about content, how are you going to find all the content, and really your enthusiasm levels as well. You might have loads of energy and drive for your first one or your first few and think you can easily do them weekly, but after a few issues, you may not lack the same drive or run out of content or have other issues that stop you. And it doesn't look good if you produce one issue or 2 issues or stop, or produce a couple of issues on a regular basis and then there's a huge gap. So you've got to be trying to find a way to be consistent. How are you going to pay for this magazine? Most magazines will pay for themselves through advertising. So if you're doing this, you need to consider a few things. How much of the magazine will be adverts? More adverts means more money, but it needs less content to draw people in. You have to have a look at sort of glossy men's and women's magazines that run to whatever 100 odd pages. Must be well over half of that is advertising, and you probably go through about 30 adverts before you get to the contents. That's very nice in a revenue point of view, but you've got to make sure the remaining content is enough to draw the people in. What would it cost to produce the magazine? So doing most of it or all of it yourself will save you money, but it will cost you in time. It may be frustrating for the elements that aren't your key skill, and it may interfere with your other work. Outsourcing reduces that burden, obviously, but it increases the cost of each publication that needs to be covered. And what return are you looking for? Advertising doesn't need to cover the cost of every issue if you feel that the extra brand awareness is likely to bring in enough new customers during the lifetime of during each publication run each year, that's going to pay for it as well. Who's going to provide the content for your publication? If this is stories about your company, then you might be writing it yourself, but you need to ensure it's engaging, and also it's going to be a lot of work. If it's news stories from your industry, then you still need to locate them, you need to review them, edit them, or rewrite accordingly, and make sure they work for you. And all this takes time as well. See who in your network can help you provide articles. This will reduce your workload, but you will need to brief them properly. The same goes for images. You either need to take them yourself, source them from a stock library or from your network, or brief a photographer. Depending on your route, you may also need to review them for quality and resolution, or provide an accurate brief for somebody else to help you with that. So what could it look like? Well, newsletters and magazines really, in my mind, the differences are that newsletters generally have articles on the front page. They're more sort of newsy by the name, obviously logically by the name, but they're smaller articles generally. They're less image-led. Generally only sort of up to sort of 12, 16 pages, something like that. Magazines have more of a glossy feel, image-led, larger images, and they'll have perhaps clearly defined sections. So they may have a news section, but that's not the whole thing. And generally, there isn't a story on the front cover. There's a dedicated cover design. And speaking of covers, long titles are more difficult to make work, especially not so bad on a newsletter, but for a magazine, shorter is generally better. If your name becomes well known, if your name of the magazine becomes well known, then you can do things where you actually start obscuring bits of the name. You would have seen this with sort of fashion magazines and things where, you know, the model on the front is their head might be covering half of the masthead, but you still know what it is. And if you get to that position, that's really, really good. The newsletters will generally work with a lead story on the front cover. With magazines, you know, you tend to see it with trade magazines that they will do a story on the front cover, or they will do an advert on the front cover, and that putting a story on it is useful for space, but it looks a bit it's okay for a trade magazine, but it's not going to work for a high quality company magazine. And the same is true by putting an advert. You look a bit desperate for money for that, and that doesn't help your branding. And it is the first thing. The cover's the first thing they see. So your advertiser's getting more coverage than you are. Internally, you want to think in spreads if it's a magazine, i.e. double pages rather than just individual pages. Newsletters are more page-based, individual page-based, the way they work. Create a strong grid that you can work on, but one that's flexible enough to allow for the varying content. Make it easy to navigate from the contents, if there is one, if it's a larger publication, through each article and past adverts that perhaps break up the story. Use a clear hierarchy of content, so that's clearly defined headlines, subheads, paragraphs, headings, body, fonts, quotes, emphasis on different areas. Headlines and other aspects may vary a little depending on the nature and style of the magazine, but I would personally say never change the body font. I've seen this done just to make something fit. It starts to look a bit amateurish. You've got to keep some consistency across the whole thing. And part of that is planning ahead. Don't make design concept decisions at the very early stages based on an ideal image or an ideal word count, because you won't get those. So establish something that means it's flexible to deal with too much copy, too little, and that will stand you in good stead. And page counts. If you are printing it, you've got to make it divisible by 4 pages, otherwise the printer can't stitch it together. You'll have a loose page falling out somewhere. So that's just one simple consideration for that. Generally, I think this applies to all types of graphic design anyway, but you know, it's as equally applicable in magazine design. It's that perfect triangle in my mind of images, copy, and design. If you've got a fantastic looking design with amazing images, but the copy is absolutely shocking, people will read it once or read a bit of it, and they're never going to read it again. They're never going to pick this thing. They're never going to buy it again or whatever. If the copy is amazing but the design is really poor, nobody's going to read it in the first place. And the same is true with the images. They've got to pull people in. They've got to be the right sort of thing. They've got to be appropriate. They've got to be good quality. So how can you do all this? Well, obviously there are various routes. There are online systems such as Blurb that can help you publish stuff. And they've got quite good systems. You've got templates that you can get for free or purchase as part of existing software if you know how to use it, so in Canva and InDesign and things like that. Or of course, you can ask an expert. So I don't say all of this to put you off the idea. It's just to ensure that you have a realistic expectation of what's involved. It's not just the design, the nice looking thing at the end. Regular publication does involve quite a bit of work, but it's a great way to raise brand awareness and to provide expertise. It just takes time, planning and effort. But by being realistic, planning carefully and outsourcing where you can, it is easily within your grasp. So well worth considering. Thank you very much. Any questions?